Hello, my name is Raquel Mazariego, and for this nutrition poster presentation, I will be presenting on answering the question, does a vegan diet improve insulin sensitivity among those with impaired glycemic regulation? So before we start off with the articles, what is veganism? Where did it start? What does it mean? What does it mean in today's society? Has that changed at all? So the term vegan first originated in 1944. The word was created by using the first three and last two letters of the word vegetarian. There were a group of 6 pioneers who founded this movement, and there were a lot of different names beforehand, but they settled on vegan. And the definition of being vegan is someone who does not consume meat, fish, poultry, eggs, or dairy products. In lay people terms, it's just you don't eat animals and you don't eat any animal products. There's a little bit of debate on whether or not honey is considered vegan, but overall the diet is focused on fruits and vegetables and plant-based sources of protein. So there have been many claims that a vegan lifestyle can improve overall health, and these claims range from improving your mental health to also physical health, such as lowering cholesterol, lowering people's BMI, blood pressure, and improving insulin sensitivity, which is really important for people who are managing type 2 diabetes or people who are at risk of getting diabetes, such as people who are overweight. So now we're going to transfer from what is veganism to what is diabetes and its history. So diabetes was previously referred to as adult onset or non-insulin dependent diabetes. In this project, we're going to be focusing on type 2 diabetes as well as people who are at risk for diabetes. So according to the American Diabetes Association, the ADA, in 2018, there were 34.2 million Americans, also 10.5% of the American population, who has diabetes. Now, people don't normally die from diabetes. However, a person's quality of life is severely diminished, and this is because of the symptoms that diabetes brings. For example, frequent urination, having blurry vision, losing sensation in your hands or feet, feeling very tired, and these can progress into something very serious, such as having to get your limbs amputated, because when you have diabetes, you have poor vascularization of your limbs, such as your fingertips, your toes, and this causes you to not be able to feel any injuries down there, or if you do have an injury, they heal very slowly. So a lot of people have to get their feet or hands amputated in extreme cases of diabetes. Now, as I said, the people don't really usually die from these complications, but they die from the complications associated with diabetes, such as stroke or increased heart risk. So many people die from heart attacks. So overall, we see diabetes is increasing so rapidly in our society, in America, and also in the world. The way it's diagnosed, there are two main ways, but there are also many ways that a doctor can use, but in this presentation we're going to focus on fasting plasma glucose, FPG. This is a test done when a person has been fasting for about 8 hours, and it's usually done first thing in the morning. If a person's levels are 100 milligrams per deciliter or lower, they are normal. Between 125, they are pre-diabetic, and over 126, they are considered diabetic. Usually it won't happen with just one reading. A person will be sent home and told to come back in a few weeks, and they'll do a second reading, and if they are still in that range, they will be diagnosed with diabetes. The other test, is HbA1c levels. So if you are 6% or lower, you're non-diabetic. If your HbA1c levels are between 6 and 6.4, you are considered pre-diabetic, and anything above 6.5% is type 2 diabetes. So now we know all this information about veganism and diabetes. How do these correlate? So let's take a walk through our history so that we can better understand how our future is going to look like. And we're going to do this through analyzing 3 research articles. The first one was published June 2nd of 2016. It is a 12-week randomization control trial. There are 93 participants aging from the ranges of 30 to 70 years old. And these participants are diagnosed with type 2 diabetes. They were randomly assigned into an experimental group, which focused on the vegan diet, 46 participants in that one, and the control group, which was a conventional diet, which the conventional diet was recommended by the Korean Diabetes Association, and there were 47 participants in this one. There were multiple things assessed in this research article, but what we're going to focus on are the HbA1c levels that were measured at baseline, 4 weeks, and 12 weeks into the trial. In that graph, you can see that in the vegan participants are in blue, their results, and the conventional diet is in orange. So what we found in this is that both diets led to a reduction in HbA1c levels that was significant. However, the reduction was actually greater in the vegan diet. So the reduction was 0.5% in the vegan and 0.2% in the conventional diet. So what does this mean overall? It means that the vegan diet appears to be more effective for glycemic control among participants who have type 2 diabetes. However, we will discuss the limitations of this research article in a bit, but let's move on to the second one. So, February 8th, 2018. We have a 16-week randomization control trial. There are 75 participants whose age ranges from 25 to 75 years old. Here, the participants did not have type 2 diabetes. However, they had a risk factor for diabetes, which is being overweight or having a BMI that is considered overweight. So the BMI ranged from 28 to 40 in this trial. The participants were randomly assigned to either an experimental group where specifically it was a low-fat vegan diet. There were 38 participants, and the control group had no diet changes, and there were 37 participants in that group. So here, measurements were taken at baseline and 16 weeks. There was no middle assessment taken. And the measurements that we're focusing on is the body mass index, the BMI, and insulin resistance using the homeostasis model assessment, also known as HOMA index. That's what we use to measure the insulin resistance. So in looking at the results here, there were no significant findings in the control group. So the results you see on this figure are just for the experimental group, where we saw a significant decrease in insulin resistance with a p-value of 0.004, and we saw a significant decrease in the participants' BMI of about 2 points, and the p-value was less than 0.001. So what does this tell us? It's telling us that the vegan dietary intervention resulted in a decrease in not only insulin resistance, but also an increase in glucose sensitivity. There is a positive correlation between decrease in BMI and decrease in insulin resistance. This is really promising and further expands on our point that the previous research article was showing us that the vegan diet has a significant impact on these measurements. The last one we're going to look at is November 2nd, 2020, very recent. It was a 16-week randomization control trial. This trial was much larger than the previous ones we looked at. It was 244 participants whose age ranged from 25 to 75 years old. Here, the participants also did not have type 2 diabetes. They had the risk factor of being overweight and having a high BMI, and their BMI ranged from 28 to 40. The participants were randomly assigned to an experimental group, which was also a low-fat vegan diet, and a control group which also had no diet changes. The difference between this research article and the one previous is it really expands on what the previous research article tried to do. The population of the participants is much larger. It's a larger study, and similar to the previous one, measurements were taken at baseline as well as 16 weeks. Insulin resistance was measured with HOMA. And the difference here is that now we're going to use the predicted insulin sensitivity index, PREDIM, to also measure specifically insulin sensitivity. The results here found no significant findings in the control group. So the significant findings that they found were in the experimental group, which there was a decrease in insulin resistance of 1.3%, and there was an increase in insulin sensitivity of PREDIM of 0.9%. So this conclusion is that the vegan diet led to a significant reduction in not only insulin resistance, but also an increase in insulin sensitivity. Now, looking at these three research articles as a whole, we see many different measurements of insulin resistance, insulin sensitivity, of HbA1c levels, as well as a risk factor of overweight for diabetes. And all of these different measurements, all of them conclude that the vegan diet was more successful in managing glycemic control for patients either at risk of diabetes or who have type 2 diabetes. However, we have to not forget that there are limitations to these 3 research articles. The first major one is compliance. The articles all across the board struggled with people following the diet, people responding and filling out all the forms they needed them to fill out. And so that is a big issue when we're trying to set a standard for level of evidence. The next one is participants were largely women. Men struggled to either join the study or also going back to compliance. Men frequently struggled with complying to the diet changes or what group they were assigned to. And so that also really hinders us being able to make an accurate and confident claim on the results of the vegan diet. The last limitation is the long-term effects. So these articles range from 12 to 16 weeks, which seems like a long time, but considering that diabetes is something that is incurable, weeks is not long enough for us to be able to make accurate claims about the longevity of this disease as well as the risk factors. Therefore, for future research, we definitely need to be focusing on creating studies that are longer, which will decrease our internal validity because it is very hard to manage all of the controls and different aspects of the experiment when it's longer. But if possible, with a higher budget, you can make a clinical trial that is a lot longer, as well as focusing on trying to evenly distribute the genders, because there is a possibility that there is a difference between the way women can manage diabetes and men can manage diabetes. And that is definitely something we should study and see if there is a difference between the genders. That would be a very interesting article. But other than that, I hope you really enjoyed this presentation, and I hope you have a wonderful day. Thank you for listening.